Hello, everybody. Today I want to have a conversation about wealth inequality. And I was listening to something that got me thinking about this today. I was listening to the Remnant podcast with Jonah Goldberg with the National Review Media Group. And I'm not a conservative, and this is a conservative group, but I would say it's one of what I think is the more trusted sites for an interesting perspective from the right, a perspective that is oftentimes worth taking seriously, even by people who are more progressive, such as myself. But today's episode, it really, I think, gets to the heart of where conservatives miss the boat around wealth inequality, or we talk more about income inequality, but they actually start talking about wealth inequality in this episode. But I think they're off base on this and in an ironic sense. So let's listen together.
Concentrations of wealth, power, and privilege in the United States. Some of that may be true, but the wealth part I'm very skeptical of. And so I sent an email to some eggheads that I respect, and also this guy, Michael Strain, and about this. And I was thinking about doing a column about it, and Michael had the best response. And let's do a podcast with him about this. So we're going to cover the waterfront on a bunch of different things, but I wanted to start with this. Michael Strain is the Director of Economic Studies here at the American Enterprise Institute. You are a columnist for Bloomberg. You are, I think, few would dispute this. The real feather in your cap of your resume is that you are the godfather to Xavier Panuru. That's correct. That's correct.
So initially he's commenting on...
I was, over the weekend, enraged by a tweet. This happens to me too often. I wouldn't say it happens to me a lot, but it happens to me too often. But Beto O'Rourke tweeted, "The unprecedented concentration of wealth, power, and privilege in the United States must be broken apart. Opportunity must be fully shared with all. We must all have the opportunities to succeed together as one country." Now, this annoyed me for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, I like the idea of attacking certain segments of society together as one country, but also...
So first of all, let me just say that I have plenty of criticisms of Beto O'Rourke, and even the framing of the issue, the way that Beto framed it, some of the words that he chose to use, such as if we go back,
power and privilege in the United States must be broken apart.
Broken apart. That is playing right into the right wing's fear around this. And you don't need to frame it that way. It's not about breaking apart. It's just about fairness in our tax systems, fairness in justice, and in economic fairness.
Broken apart. Opportunity must be fully shared with all. We must all have the opportunities to succeed together as one country. Now, this annoyed me for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, I like the idea of attacking certain segments of society together.
And the way that they're going to frame this, Jonah Goldberg and this Mr. Strain here, is as an attack. Which is why I think those of us, the majority of Americans who see that there is such a disparity in wealth and income that it's, all things considered, it's detrimental to society as a whole. And often on the right, the counter will be, oh, so you're just attacking people for being super wealthy. You're attacking people for being successful. And that's not what we're doing. We're not attacking or going after anybody. At least that's not the way that I would frame it, because that's really not what it is. We're just looking for a system that is equitable, a system that is truly based on merit. I think that's what we can all agree on. And in what ways we are falling short of that ideal. We may disagree with that a little bit, but this is not an attack. Okay, this is not an attack on, and I really don't like the framing of the 1%. I think that's outplayed and that's not totally capturing what is happening, or the 0.01%. Though you can look at any data you want, and maybe the one chart that I saw shows that the 3 wealthiest individuals in the United States have more wealth than half of all other individuals in the United States. And I'll just put it this way, so if we have a truly merit-based system, then what that says is that these 3 individuals are millions of times better people than half of Americans. And I think you can make the argument that there are certainly exceptional people, and I have no problem with if we have an exceptional person that I don't have a problem with them making a proportional amount of money to their value to society. But I do not believe that any one individual is millions of times more valuable to society than anybody else. And if it were explained to me how that exactly breaks down, I would be willing to listen, but that hasn't been explained very well to me. To me, it still seems unfathomable.
First of all, I like the idea of attacking certain segments of society together as one country, but also this conception that we have unprecedented concentrations of wealth, power, and privilege in the United States. Some of that may be true, but the wealth part I'm very skeptical of. And so I sent an email to some eggheads that I respect.
On the one hand, it's very simple, right? You want to say that the rich are doing better and the poor are doing worse. Figuring out who's rich and who is poor is hard.
How long they're rich and
how long they're rich and they're.
It's not.
What measures do we want to think about when determining who is rich and who is poor? How do we want to measure that gap? How do we want to see how it's changing over time? Why does it even matter? Do people really care?
Do people really care? That is a very important question. To them, they don't care. And I don't know how much these guys make. I would guess that they're at least earning $100,000 a year. They're certainly earning a living wage. And, I don't want to put words into their mouth. Are these the type of guys who are running in circles where they don't interact with anybody who's really struggling in America? I know this National Review podcast, they feature guys from all around the country. I think it's based in DC. I'll check that really quick. But to ask the question, do people really care? Maybe they don't, but maybe they just don't know. I think certainly progressives know. Progressives are aware of it, and progressives do care. I think a lot of people on the left in general care. I think a lot of people on the right care as well. I think that's why we have who we have in the Oval Office, as a response to a feeling that the system is rigged. I mean, how many times did you hear that on the campaign trail? So to answer his question, do people care? Yes, people do care. You might not care, but the majority of Americans, I think that we're concerned. And it's not that we're always cognizant in every interaction throughout our day that there is this gap, but it becomes pretty pronounced. It becomes it does get in your face on certain occasions. And it feels really bad because I think especially a lot of people who are on the right, who bend libertarian and have that sentiment, if they are struggling, when you have that mentality and you're struggling, then you would put it all on yourself, and maybe you wouldn't look systematically at what is happening.
Do people really care? It's one of those things where when you're kind of on the surface, it's very easy to have an opinion about this. But then when you start kind of digging, it becomes very complicated very quickly, and it's not at all clear whether people really do care.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's funny. Daniel Boorstin in one of his books, of the Americas series, is America, the discoverers, the explorers, the inventors. I can't remember what they are, but in one of them, I guess it's the national experience one, he points out that the whole idea of measuring income was kind of an American invention, in the sense that people used to talk about wealth, and it was, since almost all wealth was tied to land, it was inherited. You were, sort of income was kind of a black box for a lot.
And I agree with this. I talk a lot about this. Why do we tax income when we should be taxing wealth? And I'm all on board with that. We should be we always talk about income, but that doesn't tell us very much. And if all you're going to do is tax income, but you're not going to tax wealth, what you essentially are doing is creating a system that is forgiving those who have a lot of familial wealth, or wealth that they previously earned, or assets that they accumulated without working. They don't have to pay taxes. It's those who are actually going up in the trajectory, those who started with less and who are earning more and more. These are the people who are holding the tax base on their back.
An invention, in the sense that people used to talk about wealth, and it was, since almost all wealth was tied to land, it was inherited. You were, sort of income was kind of a black box for a lot of people. But then in America, all of a sudden, you had people who didn't come from a prominent class. They came from nothing, and income was this new way of measuring the economics of mobility and all of these things, because people weren't
and receive. And you might want to see how different groups of Americans have different consumption levels. You might actually care about income. You might care about the flow of resources that come into a house every month or every year that they can use for consumption or for savings. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to care about. You might care about earnings, which is the flow of resources coming into a house every month or every year that come from work, from jobs, as opposed to income, which, some of it comes from work, some of it comes from capital investment.
Yeah, we want to talk about wealth because that is your potential to invest. You can liquidate your assets. You can then invest in something that will potentially make you even more wealth. You can invest in campaigns for politicians and get a seat at the table in policy discussions and be highly influential in policy, given the system that we have currently. So we do want to talk about wealth, absolutely.
Years, you see a lot of people, including many people on the left, who say, no, we really should care about the top 0.1%. But if you're interested kind of in, 99% of the people don't live in the top 1%.
Right. And never, I should say never will, but by definition, there will always be a top 1%.
There will always be a top 1%.
So the argument that he's making right here is that, well, why are we so concerned about the top 1% or the top 0.1% when why aren't we talking about the other 99.9%? And we are talking about this. He's trying to make this argument. That's the whole point of this. We're looking at what's happening with these folks at the very top, and then we're looking at everybody else, And there's a big gap in the wealth, in the possibilities that come from having all of that wealth. So that is what we're talking about. This is a ridiculous argument. These guys, I've listened to a lot of their podcasts, and I have to say, I just don't feel like they were very well prepared for this episode.
0.1%, how they're doing, and how can public policy respond to that? This kind of obsessive focus on the top 1% seems confusing. Now, if you're worried about,
you are confused. I can explain it to you.
People openly arguing that the point of tax policy should be to establish a just more level society. And if you're worried about concentrations of income and concentrations of wealth, for reasons about their political influence or whatever.
And there's another point. Political, whatever it is that's causing this, yeah, that's what we need to be talking about. Don't just glaze over that point. Why has this happened? Why have we seen these trends? That's what we got to get to the bottom of. And I just don't know why on conservative media sites they don't ever go down that road. So like he was saying, if we go down a little bit deeper, yeah, I want to go a little bit deeper, but you're not going very deep in this conversation.
Concentrations of income and concentrations of wealth, for reasons about their political influence or whatever, then maybe caring about that top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1% makes more sense. But it's just, even this conversation indicates how quickly you can arrive at confusion and just how much is actually going on.
That's largely my fault, because I started on a point and then I forgot what it was going to be. For poor people around the globe, the material prosperity that your average poor person has access to is considerable.
So then there's the argument. Okay, so if you look at the average poor person, how are they doing now compared to before? And you can very easily look at medieval Europe and say, oh yeah, look at how they were living compared to people in America now. And yeah, I think Beto O'Rourke made a statement that income and wealth gaps are higher now than they were at any point in history. And maybe that's not true, but it does seem to be true that it has increased over the last 40 years in particular. And there's not been any slowing of that trend.
Quite lavish by objective historical or
lavish. So I don't know about you, when I'm driving around rural Maine and I'm interacting with people in the community, many of these folks who are struggling to earn a living wage to support their family, and certainly they don't have the means to support to work with me as somebody who has a small business in town. They can't justify it. So I don't think that those people are living lavishly at all. And you see how many people, they just can't afford health care at all. They go for a pretty routine procedure and they are bankrupted by that. So I can go on. You should listen to episode 96 of The Remnant with Jonah Goldberg, a National Review podcast. And generally, I've listened to a lot of things that were really beneficial for me to hear from Jonah and from the National Review. But this is exactly wrong. This is a perfectly wrong stance that they are taking on wealth inequality.